My name is Rose Vallejo, and I am an assistant professor here at UNM, and I am in the first year of the EDD program.
My name is Selena Hardy. I work for the Enterprise Project Management Office with CNM, and I am a first year in the cohort of the EDD program.
Right on. My name is Lechuga. I go by Sam, he, him. I am the student care coordinator with the Dean of Students Office, and I am also a first year. So a project that we were given by Dr. Yan was to reflect on leadership issues, equity issues, and things like that in our life, and how we use our life experience to learn from and help us guide us through our leadership experience. So a question that we kind of proposed was, in sharing a story, can you share a moment of struggle, insight, or tension that informs your leadership? Do either of you have a story that you would like to share?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go first. So this happened when I was very young, and I'm just going to talk about it. Okay. So this happened when I was really young, and I would say like kinder to fifth grade, I knew that something was a little bit different in how I learned.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until like 3 years ago when I watched my oldest daughter learn how to read and how she sounded out the letters, and you could see her brain connecting it, that I connected that I didn't learn how to read like everybody else did.
Mm.
I knew that there was a struggle, and I knew that there was a withdrawal from my classmates, but I didn't understand why. And it was the 90s, and I think nobody was really like looking into why I was losing my recesses because I could never pass the spelling test, or why I was getting laughed at every time I would read out loud. But it wasn't until I watched my older daughter learn how to read and really like see how her brain clicked all the sounds into place that I realized that I think that there was a misdiagnosis when I was little in dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I've looked more into it. I've looked into what it takes to get diagnosed as an adult and all the steps that it would take, and kind of how everything has happened as I've grown up. And so and that experience has really taught me that there's groups of people out there, maybe because their parents didn't want to rock the boat with the system, or because maybe they just didn't know. Our education system has so many intricacies that they just didn't know where to look. And so even when we talk about accessibility, there's always that caveat that you have something diagnosed, like it has to be diagnosed. And so it's been something that I've gone back and forth with about whether or not that's an avenue that I want to pursue. But that's something that I consider all the time, is that we need to make things accessible for everybody, even if we don't know if something could be underlying there, or even if they don't know,
right,
that they've just created those coping mechanisms. So just I try to be thoughtful in everything I do, and I know I miss some stuff because of awareness, but that's a piece that I know I've grown to live with, and I hope that I can exude in my leadership somehow.
Yeah. So, I know you kind of talked about how you saw your daughter learning how to read, and that made you kind of process everything. How did that make you feel, like, in that moment? And, like, moving forward, how have you used that experience to kind of guide your leadership now?
That's complicated, right? Like there's this it's this moment of like when you watch your child ride their bike without their training wheels for the first time. This like extreme enthusiasm of watching them click and put things into place. And so it's the duality of feelings, right? You have you're excited, you this little human that you're helping shepherd into being their own person is developing their own piece. And then I left the room and I cried. And I have the recording because I'm so excited for her. And I cried, and I turned to my husband and I said, "This is not how I learned. This is not how my brain works." And but now even like watching my younger daughter learn how to read, and now some of her struggles. So now my husband and I are showing up to address some of her struggles before they become an issue. And I leave those meetings wondering why nobody did it for me. And it's no judgment on my parents. My parents didn't know, or the school didn't know. But always wondering if we're going too hard or if we're doing too much. And my husband, he's quick to say, like, I'm learning from what happened to me, and we're trying to, make sure that my younger daughter doesn't have to come into those struggles. I think how that shows up in my leadership is there are moments like in class reading our textbooks, at work reading, and even just like how people critique your work at work and they catch all your spelling errors. That I think is something that I'm super and I went into I have to chart. Part of my work is to facilitate to spell in front of people. So developing, like, it'll be just a scribble at the end of the word, or my I before my E would never be correct. And so I think giving people grace to be who they are, and not to judge them on the minute details of their work. Like, we can have high quality work and we can build a team together, and we can help support each other where there's gaps, but not to give each other grace to help make each other better, not to make somebody feel stupid for something that they may not control.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate that. I know it's not always easy to share those kinds of things, and especially your reflections. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yan. So I guess another question that we have too is, how does your story, right, which you just shared, and maybe you kind of touched on it a little bit, inform how you lead, maybe in positions at work or even in class when we're doing like group projects? How does your story kind of impact how you lead? And I know you kind of talked about giving people grace. Is that something that you actively practice, or is that just kind of sitting in the back of your head?
I think that's something that has just kind of grown up with me. The piece that, and I actually wrote about this in Dr. Yan's first paper of like that self-reflection, is impacting how I lead, is that self-confidence, right? You have a fundamental cornerstone in your developmental years of like being able to show up in your classroom as an active member. And my mom told me, I don't think she realized the connection. She's like, yeah, we were a little bit worried about you, when we would get called into the school because you were not participating. And so I think there's this K5, K12 moment of confidence building that was just chipped away at. Because when you feel like you cannot keep up, you are punished repeatedly for something out of your control. Now it's confidence. And in my assessment, with our first paper with Dr. Yan, that's what I talked about, right? Is I know that I need to build up that confidence. And it's this constant, like, but what's authentic to me? And so mentally, and it is like, how do I show up confidently, but without steamrolling others? And so that's the piece that I hope, because I don't want to be like, wait, move out of the way. I have a whole bunch of time to make up. And I want to be able to show up confidently while still respecting others and how they are in their journey. And I think, and that piece right there slows me down just enough that then people are like, man, I wish you would have acted sooner. I wish you would have jumped in a little bit quicker. And so that's the piece that I hope that I'll be able to work on in this program, and I will be able to strengthen in the coming years, now saying it out loud, talking to others, and not hesitating, and being confident in who I am, and knowing that that struggle actually wasn't a roadblock, but it created opportunities to grow and to blossom. And these are like the affirmations I tell myself in the morning, not like, but to grow and to blossom and to be that person. And without that, that's not who I would be today. And so not to think of it as like a struggle that's holding me back, but to think of it as something that's given me insight into helping my children, into helping my colleagues, and into being a stronger leader with, I think, more compassion and humility.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Dr. Jan's class and the paper. Was there anything in our readings that resonated with you?
Oh, good question. So I would think that, what is it? Brookfield and
Preskill.
Preskill and
Preskill.
Brookfield.
The piece on hope.
Mm.
So that piece, because we talk about confidence, and you think about like how, and one of them talked about their own personal struggle, and about how you can kind of like slip below. And so I think hope as a practice is something that's really important to me in my leadership. The other piece from our reading is like from Paulo Freire, when he talks about like how one type of education that we focus on is the banking. And so and I was put in, silly enough, I could not pass this spelling test to save my life, but at one moment in my K5, I was actually put in gifted programs. And so and that was like worksheet after worksheet, just and punishment for not being able to keep up with that banking model. And so that really was like, oh, I've experienced that. And then I think the other piece of hearing people's stories from the book, the companion guide.
To ethics.
Yeah, the companion to ethics. And hearing their stories and how that's also given them a different view on how to move forward and move through everything.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Because you said you were in the gifted program.
Mm-hmm.
When you started that program, did it feel as if, I knew you mentioned it was kind of like punishment while you were in there.
Mm-hmm.
When you first started in the program, did it kind of give you a little bit of a confidence boost? Or were you feeling like, oh, now I got to work twice or 3 times as hard in order to keep up?
So I was in 3rd grade.
Okay.
So I can tell you like the feelings with the memories, but I can't tell you exactly.
Yeah.
Or even what got me there. I think it was the GATE program out of California. I don't know. I think I tested into it. So I was one of the special, like, and my math scores tested me into it. I don't remember feeling special. I don't ever remember them talking to us about like, you guys, you earned your spot. But I remember day after day losing recess, which now we know too in education how detrimental that is to kids. And that speaking, and that just triggered another thing of I love connecting with my colleagues. And so we talk about recess in K-12, but I think we also need to acknowledge like just that downtime with our colleagues during the day is so important. It to be able to connect and to like take off our working hat and to just process things with each other through a different means rather than just emailing or just being on the computer back and forth. So I don't remember the confidence boost because I think just right out of the gate I was just tripping over myself.
Right.
And so yeah. And my parents said it was really hard to remove me from the program.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And so they did show up. I think just they didn't know all of the differences.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
It's hard to advocate when you don't know what your options are, what the resources are, right? So.
Right.
Yeah. And that, I think, so and this reminds me of a story from my grandmother. So my family's been in California for a long time. I think they migrated there when they were, like, during the Mexican-American War. My dad was a migrant farmer. So he was pulled out of elementary school back and forth between California and Texas. So it's and where we got to was a long road. But I think like there's a moment of changing, and we talked about Maslow's hierarchy, changing between survival of just getting your basic needs met to thriving in your space. And I feel like I may have been that child in that different space where my parents were thankful that we had enough money, because there's a story of like when they were first married, they were joyful about finding enough money for a gallon of milk. And so, and that was such a treat that they could finally buy fresh milk. And so there's that transition from extreme poverty over into having privilege or having some, but not exactly knowing the avenues in it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. It's very powerful, very like moving story, to
Very
see,
thoughtful.
yeah,
Thank you.
to see that process of, oh, I didn't have this for myself, but I want to make sure that my child has this. We see it with your parents and with you, right? And hopefully with your kids as well as they move forward, right? So, thank you for sharing that. That was
Thank
really
you.
powerful and very, very good story.
So my turn, right? Mine is more kind of pieces that come together about education for me. So I am a first generation college student. My mom is from Mexico and she immigrated to California when she was 18. My father is Mexican American, born in California.
Okay.
So, it was essentially two cultures in my home. But in either case, I grew up in a very traditional Mexican household. My father would influence my brothers to go to college, but the girls were not. And so I was taught to cook, clean, so I can be a good housewife. But about fifth grade, something happened and I really got into school. No, about third grade actually. And I was always studying. I loved school. It was where I was seen. I had teachers who really supported my growth and saw something in me that I had never experienced. Anyways, my parents didn't know what to do with me. I had one brother say they were afraid of me in the sense of I had these ideas. I'm going to college. I'm going to be independent. I'm going to move out to college. And it's like, no, you only move out when you're going to get married, So there was, so in any case, I went to college. I wasn't allowed to move away at first. And it was more of, I could feel it. While I was supported, it was kind of an appeasement, right? It was like, okay, yeah, she'll go. But I even had my father, I love my father, very loving man, but in his not understanding my journey, had said, why are you going to college? You're going to find a man who you have to support, or your husband's going to take care of you. And I even carried that with me. And in any case, I ended up going to school, was being real busy. So that was like my childhood growing up. Really great education, middle school. And it was there that I also got identified as GATE. But then I went to high school. And my story is I went to two different high schools. My freshman year, I went to the inner city Barrio High School. And, with all these readings and reflection, it's helped me kind of define that environment. Because when I went there, again, very different from middle school, there was a lack of engagement, not only from the students, but the teachers. There wasn't this, we're going to learn, we're going to create a learning environment. It was a waste of time. And I look back and I think had I stayed there, I would have been lost. Even though I was a really good student, I was in honors, I would have been lost. Fortunately, my parents decided to move. They had a restaurant that was very successful, and they decided to move because my youngest brother was starting to hang out with the wrong crowd. So we moved to a upper middle class neighborhood. So the difference was, just to have a sense, my friends, their parents were attorneys and doctors, and our next door neighbor was a chemist. So it was a very different world. Anyways, I was excited to move, let everyone know. And in that high school, in the barrio, I had one teacher. She's the only teacher whose names I remember. I don't remember any of the other teachers. That's how little impact they had on me. But hers I remember. And the reason why was because at the end of the school year, she knew I was moving. She evidently had either taught at that school or in that area. And she pulled me aside and said, Rose, you were kind of between an A-, B+. You're going to be going to that high school. I decided to give you a B+ so you can get used to it. What that told me in that moment was I wasn't good enough. I wasn't going to make it. And, you know, she was there. I don't know why she was there. I'm wondering if she projected her difficulties there or not. I don't know what it was, but I know what the message was to me.
Yeah.
Now, instead of being excited about going to a new school and moving, I was worried. So when I enrolled in that high school, I automatically enrolled and disenrolled from all my honors and AP classes.
Oh, wow.
And went into general education. My parents didn't know any better. They didn't say, no, Rose, you can do that, you know.
Yeah.
And it was easy. My counselor, okay, they disenrolled me. I spent like 2 or 3 days in the general education classes. I was bored out of my skull. Got my dad, went back to the counselor's office and asked to be re-enrolled. And this time though, now it was, are you sure you want to do that?
Oh, how interesting.
Really? You know, are you sure? You know, it's going to be harder. You know, so it was really interesting in you know, reflection, how easy it was to be disenrolled in the honors, but how they were, you know, questioning my going in. You know, it's those little biases, right? So anyways, I enrolled, I did well, I did fine. It was harder, it was work, but I was able to do it. And fortunately, I did. Because, you know, versus the other school I was at, there was one honors cohort that they could barely fill. Here, there were 3 cohorts of students in honors that were busting at the seams. So everyone around me was college bound, was talking about college, their grades were competitive. So this was the environment that I was in, and this was the environment I adopted, which helped me kind of just follow the lead, because my parents didn't know how to help me. Follow the lead and got me into, you know, it was important for me to go to college. I will say, looking back, you know, I was the only Latina in my classes. You know, I'm often the only Latina in spaces. And I remember oftentimes trying to minimize it or being ashamed of it, you know, and, you know, how you have to hide some of your authenticity to fit in when you're the only one in that kind of space. I think especially as a teenager, right? As an adult, that's not the case. If anything, I think it's the opposite. So, but in that story, I mention all those things because, you know, what in terms of our readings, it was in the empathetic storytelling text, the first story by Duncan, where he says something along the lines of death, oh gosh, what is it? 1,000 deaths by concession. You know, and Dr. Jan said along the ways of like death by 1,000 cuts. Right. And that's what those stories are, right? It's, you know, you're not going to do as well at that school. It's you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, you're a girl in a Latino culture, right? It's, are you sure you want to re-enroll in honors? You know, and then needing to kind of hide a little bit of who I am in those environments where I'm the only Latina, you know. And so, you know, because you can be Latina, but not too Latina, right? So.
Yeah. There's, I can't remember who says it. And maybe it was in a book or something I read a long time ago, but it's, did you feel that you were maybe too Mexican for the white folks, but too American for the Mexican folks? So you're trying to.
So in that school environment, I was too Mexican. I say even now, there are times I'm too Mexican. It's when you're the only Latina in the room. People want your perspective when it's convenient. When it's inconvenient, you're disregarded. College. So I shared how my parents had a restaurant and it became very successful. And so when I went to college, my first year of college, I was gung-ho. I was going to get good grades and I was going to prove the world wrong. Right? That's how I went into college. And I remember I ended up going to the Chicano student programs. So I had a new friend of mine that I had made just before college. And anyways, in the Chicano student programs, I and my friend, who I happened to meet through friends, because we were both going to the same college, we were both Latina. She was Cubana, I was Mexican American, or she was Cuban American, I was Mexican American. And because we lived in that area, we both had new cars.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we dressed a little differently, and and I just remember not being Latina enough in the in Chicano student programs.
Yeah.
So yeah, you find it sometimes, or sometimes like when I go into environments where my husband and I both have our doctorates, and so when we go into Latino, like really rich Latino communities, I find they'll like almost be subservient to my husband and I.
How interesting.
And it's like my husband and I go with total humility, and we try to go more casual because we don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
So it happens in many different ways. So I think it's just about going in with humility.
With humility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you shared, kind of battling and riding the fence, right? How does that, trying to fit in maybe the two spaces or two cultures, guide your leadership today and guide how you navigate the world?
Yeah.
And being a professor and being a teacher, how do you navigate that, trying to fit in the both worlds?
So I think first and foremost, knowing that, that death by 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I show up really trying to be relational with my students.
Right.
Validating them. A lot of our students, and I don't care what race, ethnicity, culture, a lot of our students come in, first generation, rural. They come in with imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a wake-up call because it's a very intensive program, which just kind of feeds into that imposter syndrome. I really show up by expressing to students I believe in them, that they're capable, and making them feel safe. The other way I show up, I think in particular to my students of color, because it's walking that fence, right? I need to make sure they know I'm a safe space and that I can identify with them. At the same time, I don't want to make my other students feel unsafe.
Right.
Right. A good educator teaches effectively to everyone. Right. I'm doing my part. I don't know that everyone's doing that.
Right.
Right. But in any case, how I do it is I have Latino artwork in my office. So it's all Mexican American artists. And so when students come in who are Latino or other ethnic minority groups, they see I associate with my culture. And I celebrate it and I share it to everyone. So I celebrate the beauty. And it's kind of my way of making up for those teenage years where I was a little embarrassed and didn't associate. So I celebrate it. And I've made a point with my own sons to celebrate it. And the way I do that, not only is my office Latino artwork, it's my home, it's our food, it's our rock en español. So we celebrate it. And it's very purposefully done so that our boys have a lot of pride, not only in their Latino, but also their Navajo background. Okay. And so we celebrate both with a lot of pride in our home. The beauty.
That. Yeah.
So.
Love that.
That's I feel really like the way you shared it is like at one point you felt like you had to make yourself small, to go in a box in one piece of your life, and then even to be smart and education driven at home, you had to fit yourself in a box. And I feel like what you just described is like you just broke down all those boxes and everything is living together in harmony, and it sounds really beautiful.
Well, this is what I'm reflecting on now. So yes, in some ways. In other ways, I find I'm in an environment where my voice has been contained. And because how that has happened, it's a person with power over me who has contained that voice. I have to be strategic and careful. So I can't I have to be careful about how I advocate for our students with disadvantaged backgrounds, the whole spectrum, which is about more than half of our students in our doctoral program. So I find other ways in planting seeds. So, yeah.
Just still trying to navigate that.
Well, and the way I navigate it, so the other piece of it, one of my passions is culturally responsive teaching. It is really important to me that I teach every one of my students effectively. And because you learn that students who come from backgrounds that are more collaborative or relational, like Latinos, Blacks, Southeast Asians, Native Americans, right? Rural, even rural, that they learn differently than our traditional lecture. You know, the lecture puts them at a disadvantage. Even big group discussions put them at a disadvantage. And so I try to educate the faculty about this. Actually, I and another professor teach on inclusive teaching and learning on North Campus. And so I try to have impact through education of my colleagues. And some listen, some write it off, you know, so it's through there I'm trying to chip away and open my voice. I will say it took a little bit, but on our strategic plan, we got using inclusive teaching practices.
Oh, I love that. So,
but it's an uphill battle to try to make sure everyone's got buy-in because people don't understand.
Yeah.
You know. So that's how I show up.
Right on. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I do have a quick follow-up question because you talked about, you know, your parents kind of saying that if you go to college, you're going to get, you know, the MRS degree, you know, the Mrs. degree.
Yeah.
Are your parents still with us?
My mom is.
Your mom is? When you started going to college and kind of gathering, I don't want to say the papers, right? You know, you have your doctorate already. And you're going back for another doctorate degree, which I don't know how you do it. At what point, if at all, did their support of you shift in going from, I don't understand why you're going to college to, wow, like you did the thing, like you proved us wrong. Did that ever happen?
Yeah, it was incremental.
Okay.
So for my mom, it was different for my mom and dad. Okay. So when I decided I was going to go to college, after my first year, I decided I was going to become a physical therapist. In any case, so I started volunteering. I went and volunteered at a clinic, and that director became a mentor to me. She was wonderful. So much so that anytime I was off from school, they gave me a job.
Oh, that's
right.
Awesome.
So here I was in job. Well, back then in physical therapy clinics, we wore white coats. You know, the white coat. And so here I was a little tech, you know, learning. I shouldn't say little tech because so needed, but I mean, because I was really young. I was like 19, 20 years old. And I was a tech, and my mom once walked in and saw me behind the reception area with the white coat. And then it was, mi hija va a ser doctora. My daughter's going to be a doctor. And then it was at that point that she had pride in that. And so she was going to support that because, you know, in all fairness, for my mom, it was because I was an extension of her. You know, that's how my mom functioned. My dad was different. But then the dialogue of my moving away to go to a PT program was allowed. For my dad supported me. I think he felt he had to because he had supported my brothers through college, right? But it wasn't until I graduated and I got my first job. This was back in 1995. My first job paid me $55,000, and back then, full benefits, full retirement, dental, everything. So when I got the job, I called my dad. I go, Dad, I got the job, and this is, you know, I'm making this, and this. And he's all, oh, really good, Mija. That's, you know, good. I'm happy for you. It wasn't until a couple years later that he shared the story. And I heard him telling someone, yeah, when she told me about her job, I thought, God, this girl, she knew something I didn't.
Oh, wow.
She figured it out.
Wow.
And then I think the other part that helped them realize, so my sister followed their direction. She got married right out of high school and ended up divorced. Her husband was physically and emotionally abusing her. So right as I was finishing college, getting a good job, my sister got divorced.
Oh, no.
And so I saw my parents trying to encourage her to go to college so that she had no way to like really take care of herself. So she was working in the restaurant. And so they ended up trying to encourage her and, you know, saw that it wasn't about depending on a husband or not, it's about being able to care for oneself.
Right.
You know. So did that answer your question?
Absolutely did. Thank you for sharing that. It's very powerful.
Oh.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I don't know if we.
Well, what about you, Sam?
Yeah.
Share a struggle or insight or something that's impacted your leadership.
Yeah. One thing I'll touch on is, and you might have already seen it. If I wink at you, it's not because I'm hitting on you, right? So I have Tourette's, and there's this funny video. That's a different story, but it's called "I Have Tourette's, but Tourette's Doesn't Have Me." So that was something that I watched that when I first got diagnosed back in 3rd grade, and Tourette's my entire life has kind of, been a part of me. So you'll see me making funny faces. Sometimes I have a very mild case, thankfully. So I don't have the fun kind of Tourette's, like I like to call it, where I get to curse and curse people out and blame it on Tourette's. But one story, I have so many stories that come with Tourette's, but one story in particular that really stands out to me, and I tell because I just think it's funny, is back in college, I worked at this space where we would put on like shows for the college. So it was in like a theater setting, and I was running like the lights on top and working the curtain and all of that, and we were doing a talent show. And for that talent show, there was this lady, and she was singing very beautiful, very great songs. And show ends, whatever. I close the curtain, and she walks out, and I am having my facial tics. And she goes, "Oh, are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm good." She's like, "Well, what's wrong with your eye?" I was like, "Dust in it." I was like, "No, I have Tourette's, blah, blah." I was like, "Yeah, I've had it all my life. It doesn't bother me." All that. She goes, "Oh, how's your relationship with your father?" And I'm sitting there going, "I don't even know you. I don't know your name. I just met you, and you're asking about my relationship with my father." I was like, "It's good." She goes, "Oh, okay, good. Can my husband and I pray for you?" And growing, I was like, "You know what? Sure. Pray for me. I'm going to continue doing my work. Tomorrow's Sunday. Pray for me at church. Love that. Thank you. God bless." Mm-hmm. So she walks away and continue the talent show, and show ends, right? But because of that, like, it made me a little bit nervous, and so my tics started acting up a little bit. And so, I'm ticking, I'm doing my work and all of that, and then her and her husband walk back at the end of the show. "Hey, so we're here to pray for you." I said, "Son of a gun. You guys are going to pray for me right here, right now." "All right, cool." I was like, "Fine." It's like, I can get 5 minutes to do this. So I was like, all right. So we go in this little hallway. The hallways, you could put your arms across and touch the walls. It's very small, so we're really, really crammed together. And so I was like, I was raised Catholic. When you get ready to pray, you do the sign of the cross, and you get ready to pray. They say, "All right, we're gonna hold hands." I said, "Oh, already this is different." So holding hands, and he says, "Dear Lord Jesus, we're praying here for," "What's your name?" "Sam." "Oh, we're here praying for Sam so that you can remove the demon of Tourette's that he has inside of him." I say, "Demon? Interesting. All right, whatever." I'm just sitting here, and as he's talking, I get a little bit nervous. And what happens when I get nervous? My tics start going. So I'm over there just kind of moving and doing my little tics and stuff. And they start praying, and he goes, "All right, thank you." And we stop holding hands, and like, "Okay, cool, thank you, we're done." And I go to shake his hand, and I shake his hand, and he grabs it, and he puts his hand on my chest. He starts speaking in tongues, and he's there. He's going, and again, what happens when I get nervous? My tics start going again. So he's there praying in tongues for me, and I'm sitting there shaking, and he's like, "Oh, the devil is coming out." And I had never had an experience like that before in my life. To this day, I've never had an experience like that. But that, I think, to me, was probably the most interesting experience I've ever had, of how sympathy versus empathy can kind of make you think that you're helping someone when you're really just causing harm, right? And that's, I think, I use that story and reflect on it, on how I show up for students in my job. So, they thought that they were doing the right thing, right? Or felt that they were, right? Depends on who you ask. To me, it was not. Because I very much was like, "You know what? I don't need you to pray for me. I'm okay with who I am, how I show up. If I, have little facial tics, that's fine. But in that moment, I realized that there's a difference between sympathy and empathy, right? You can empathize with someone and be like, oh man, that kind of sucks, but it seems like he's fine. I don't need to do anything. How can I help you? Do you need help? Right? Very much so. I could have said no, and that would have been that. But they had the sympathy part of it, of he needs to be saved from what he's going through. He needs to be fixed from what he's going through. And I think I try to reflect on that in working with the students that I work with now, because there's so many times that students show up and they're dealing with probably some of the worst situations that they've ever had in their life. Maybe they just, broke up with their boyfriend for the first time, or, their partner was emotionally, physically abusive, and they're coming to me and this is the worst thing that they've ever done, but for me, it's another Tuesday. So trying to show up for them and say, okay, are you wanting to talk about it? Are you wanting to try and figure something out? Or do you just need, like a shoulder to cry on? So trying to navigate that, and instead of, okay, well, let me fix this for you. Let me give you all of these resources that you need. Let me make sure that you're okay. It's got to take a step back and listen, right? Of, all right, well, what do you need? How can I help? Do you want help, right? And I think in looking back, as the learning as a way of leading, it's the Preskill, Brookfield, right? He has a chapter where he talks about analyzing experience, right? And taking a moment to step back and learn from experiences that maybe we've had, that other people have had, and how to show up in those moments. So I think that's, for me, that's something that I always try to do, is look at the moments that I've had, right? Whether it be because of the disability I have, because of my race or ethnicity, and show up in different ways for the students, and trying to be culturally sensitive, as you kind of shared as well, right? Culturally responsive as well, to support these students and not try to be the savior, right? Especially for our students who are very minoritized, but try to be, the hand up to help them instead of hand out, right? So
I want to ask a follow-up question, because you talked about this experience with such grace and even humor, right? My question is, afterwards, how did that make you feel? Like, how did it make it feel then? But then even now, the feelings you feel in reflecting on it.
Yeah, I think and this is just how I try to approach life, is I try to find the humor in everything. And the reason being is, I feel that if you allow certain issues, right, and this is just my response to this, right, is if you can laugh at it, it doesn't really control you anymore, right? If you can laugh at it, you have taken away the power that that might have over you. So even in experiences where people have spat on me, or called me racial slurs or anything like that, like, I tried to find the humor in it, of like, I can't believe this guy, like, who do they think they are, right? So I think at the moment I was very taken aback. It was very different for me, and very, like, I felt, I don't know, I think maybe unseen, right? Because to me, it's nothing it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just a part of who I am, right? And I've lived my life like that. It's a part of who I am, right? Just kind of, I don't want to equate, a disability to race or anything like that, right? But kind of how you talked about, of, it's a part of who I am, and I'm going to show up and show out. I don't care if it upsets people or not. Like, if you don't like it, then that's on you.
But that takes time.
Yeah, it does.
Because of those wounds. The wounds of not being seen, or someone thinking they see something else. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, when I first was diagnosed, I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, right? So already that's a weird time. And I was bullied pretty bad in elementary school, particularly for the Tourette's, right? Because at the time I had a little bit more verbal, so I would make some noises that were a little strange. I would have some weird facial tics, and people would just look at me like, why do you do that? What's wrong with you? Right? As if there was something wrong with me. So kind of learning how to navigate that, and I think using humor for me really helped kind of take away that power, right, that people may have had over me, or that their words may have had over me, to help me get through that. So
Very powerful.
I think you really touched on the intersectionality that we are like one, even though like nobody's monolithic or no experience is monolithic. So the Latino experience like has so many intricacies with it, and even how you talked about your friend in college, and how it almost felt like not enough, like you didn't show up enough. So when we talk about the Latino and Latina, like there's so many different experiences within one piece, and then within each individual, like there's so many like points of intersection of who we are and what we bring to the table. And I think everybody talked about it of trying to address the individuals we work with the knowledge that they're coming with so much of their story, and it's been so impacted by their culture, by their background, by where they grew up. You talked about the rural areas and how we try to be empathetic to how we work with them and how we engage with them.
Yeah.
Well, and I know one thing that comes, you spoke to it, one of the other ways I try to navigate it, right, is through the hope, And, there's been a time where I think I was a little hopeless in some regards in terms of, what I do. But where I found that I don't lose hope is with the students, right? But all this reflection, it was in reflecting through the hope chapter in Preskill and Brookfield.
Yeah.
That in reading that, I realized, because I'm not addressing this other issue where I've been kind of put in a box in my current work situation, that even though I don't speak of it, I kind of avoid it, I'm being a good Latina, the students will pick up on it.
Yeah.
Not only that, I'm not fully free. And I need to be fully free to fully manifest the hope, right? So that way I, as an educator, don't have any limitations when I work with my students. There was one quote, I'm going to read it. For me, that was really important. It was Herb Cole said, "Hope is the refusal to accept limits on what your students can learn or what you as a teacher do to facilitate learning." That's really resonates to me, because before the thing that people would say was that, minoritized students, they just can't cut it. They're not smart enough. They can't do it. Well, now what's being said is they haven't been prepared enough. That's still, I'm realizing that is still code. All the onus is on what happened before, the education that was perhaps subpar. No onus now, right? And so for me, that sentence really resonated, because I see that there isn't this humility and self-reflection amongst some of the educators to really go, there's full capabilities here. There's endless hope. What are we going to do to manifest it with our students, right? What are we going to do as a whole collective? And that's where I get frustrated, and I need to find hope. I do it in my class. And I also need to do it at another level.
Yeah.
So, remind me of the chapter in Preskill and Brookfield about the learning as a way of leadership. I hear that so much in your story, where you have taken on your leadership role as a learner, and as a learner of kind of gaining those different insights and then informing of how you move forward.
As you say that, the only thing that comes to mind is because of the people. People matter. People matter, and I trust people have good intentions.
Yeah.
And I think, the crux of it in our readings is, if we trust the intent of people, that's foundationally how everything changes. But people don't trust.
Yeah.
They judge. It's easier to judge than to ask questions.
Yeah.
I think the hard part is like in the group dynamics book by Forsyth, is he addresses though that there are people who use their power for evil almost,
Mhm.
who use their narcissism and to elevate themselves. And I think like as a leader, it's that recognition of how to move forward and how to hold on to that hope and how to continue to lead while also knowing that there's this other side out there. And so I think, yeah, that's something to reflect on. Like it's just all these pieces are coming together.
Even like Paulo Freire's book. I mean, it's oppressor, oppressed, right? And it's this common dynamic, and, if you're an oppressor, you can't be part of the solution.
Right.
It's the oppressed who have to come up and change that.
Right.
And there has to be knowledge too of what's out there. So I wonder, like in thinking about like your story about how you were able to go to school, like who in your life opened you up to being a PT or you want to share that story of the dissection. And so I think, or just the medical field that kind of nudged you this way. And so Paulo Freire talks about like that acknowledgement about what else is out there. And that ability to kind of, the oppressed has to see it, to kind of go into it. I think that's what he was talking about. And so, and I think that's why we talk about why representation matters. Why, and even how you're in this place where you work with students to show them like it's okay, you can trust me and follow me. And so it's the ability to kind of be able to show people it's okay. We've already walked this path.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, I've waited obviously a long time to go on for this doctorate. But the reason why is because, I have a clinical doctorate, not a terminal doctorate. And my students see that. So I've got to change that. Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So now I just want to also have us share a little bit about, when we first set out on this idea to do the podcast, right? We had talked about it being a Latine, the intersectionality of being Latine and leadership. But obviously, I mean, there is some of that intersectionality, but, two of your stories were more about learning disability, or neurodivergence. Is that fair? Okay. Can you share why, we had a little bit of discussion as to why that was, and can we just share it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I really think that mine has to go, we talk about generational trauma or inherited trauma, right? Education was always this point of that, like my dad was lucky to have it. I think he's wicked smart, and so he got through his education and got his college scholarship because he worked really hard for it. I can't imagine being a little kid and working in the fields and then also doing your homework. Like that sounds so incredibly hard. And not only doing your homework, but doing it so well that a college came and offered him a scholarship. And he said it was like a blind date. Like he'd never been to the campus before his first day of college.
Oh, wow.
And my grandparents had told him over and over again that it was a trick, that they were just, the white men were just going to laugh at him. And they didn't have money. We talk about like in paying for college, there's always like what your parents will pay. His parents didn't have money to pay. Like they barely were able to put food on the table. So how are they going to pay their portion? So I feel like my dad's experience, even though it wasn't my experience, it was definitely something that was taught to me, something that I was able to honor, like in how my grandfather was able to, and my grandmother were able to pull their family out of a certain level, and how my dad was able to move us forward. And so I feel like that was such a cultural experience as well, that and my grandmother on my maternal side going to school and like she in World War II times and literally getting beaten for speaking Spanish. And so there's all these pieces of generations before me that have impacted how I've come to be, or why I don't speak Spanish. It's because it was literally beaten out of my family by the American school system. And so I think that probably even comes into play of how my parents may have interacted with the schools, or how my parents were like, oh, but you can't be different. because if you're different, you won't finish. And maybe that's also the time period too. Whereas now I know when we're looking at schools, it's like it's so much different than it was. It's so much different than you remember it to be, because we're embracing the child. And whereas before it was like, oh, you just sit over there because you're different. And so I think it has a lot to do with the time, with maybe with how schools were. There's this mistrust, right? Like it's mentioned my grandmother getting beaten for speaking Spanish, and so how is there this trust in the system? And so I think that's kind of where it crosses over for me. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something that you said briefly was, if you're different, you kind of sit over there, right?
Yeah.
That reminds me, when I first was diagnosed, I was put on like an IEP for the disability, right? Because and one of those things is that's when standardized testing first started, right, in like the mid 2000s. And in the IEP, I was told that I needed to sit separate from others, which that's fine, right? I didn't want to, interfere with other people's test taking and things like that. But what ended up happening was I was put in a corner, like physically put in a corner where I was facing the wall, and all of my classmates were behind me, and I couldn't look left or right without looking at a wall. And I think that like othering, right, really makes you kind of reflect on how are we doing this to our students today, intentionally or unintentionally, right? So, but kind of going back to, so thank you for reminding me of that, but kind of going back to what you were asking, Rose, is I think for me too, right, is because we have these experiences, right, but we're still Latine. Being Latine, right, is just not who we are. It's just a part of who we are. And we have
it's not the whole thing.
It's not the whole thing, right? But we do have these other lived experiences outside of that. And so to try and show that in education and outside of that, we are different, right? We have our own lived experiences that guide how we want to show up for other people, how we want to show up for our students, is not just a race thing or a cultural thing. It's that and, right? It's a yes and. But yeah, I think, and maybe I want to ask a question of you all as well, is like, what brought you to this program? I know you kind of touched on, your family generation, and I think for me, what you talked about is your dad working in the fields, and that really reminds me of my dad, right? I always say that my dad gave me my first PhD, right? It's a post-hole digger, and we joke about that, right? That my dad has a PhD he's a post-hole digger, but he's got like a 6th, 7th grade education. So my dad is from Mexico as well, and he came to the United States when he was 19. Didn't know anyone. Came here in a country that is very foreign to him, doesn't speak the language, and started, trying to live here to make a better life for his family. I think that's a big driving force for me, right? He's a successful businessman. He owns a plumbing company, STA Plumbing. Everyone check that out. Just got to selflessly plug him. But there's that aspect of it, of I don't want his sacrifice of leaving a country, leaving his family behind that he didn't get to see for years until he got his residency, until he got his citizenship, which he's now a full citizen. Thank you, especially in this current state of time, right?
No, scary.
Very scary, That's a whole different conversation. That's a whole nother hour and a half. But that part of, I don't want his sacrifice of leaving everything behind for a future family that wasn't even guaranteed, right? To make sure that sacrifice doesn't go in vain. So I want to go as far as I can in my education. So growing up, I worked with my dad. The second I could pick up a shovel, right, I was out there digging ditches with him, learning the trade, right? And every summer that I worked with him, he was always telling me, in 20 years, I don't want to see you out here. If you're out here using your brawn, right, using your body to earn a living, that's going to make me upset. Use your brain. Sit in an air-conditioned office, right? Use that to make your money. And I think that, for me, is something that is constantly guiding why I do what I do, why I'm continuing my education, why I work in an air-conditioned office, thankfully, right? Also with my mom, she's an educator, right? She was probably she was my first teacher, right? And learning from her and seeing the importance of education right? Through her, right? I from my dad, I saw what an education wouldn't get me, right? A formal education, rather, would get me more often than not, right? Working outside, because that's just how you have to earn a living. Whereas with my mom, as a teacher, she instilled in me the importance of education and how far it could take you, right? Where it could get you. And kind of combining those two, that's for me is my driving force.
Your why.
My why is to, I think as Latino people, it's a lot of, hey, I want to make my parents proud. But it's also, I don't want their sacrifices as they did to go in vain. So I want to know what your why is as well.
So mine, like you, my parents worked really hard. My mom was from Mexico. She came to the U.S. at 18 from a parents who were really poor. I mean, so I think, as an example, my grandmother was a child maid in Mexico, and her payment was getting the leftovers from the plates so she could eat, So my parents working really hard, even though they didn't encourage me to go to college, they encouraged my brothers. And so my being a rebel was I'd hearing, well, if the boys can do it, I can do it. Right? There was that side of me. My mom, go serve your brothers and your dad. I'm not serving my brothers and my dad. They can get up and, so that's where my parents were afraid of me. Right. I questioned this male-female dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
But hearing my parents talk about, my dad telling my brothers, no, you're going to college so you don't have to work as hard as I do.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to struggle as much as we have had to struggle. That's part of it. In terms of doing well for, in general, and originally going to college. Now, I think I touched on it, is so, in higher education, there's a hierarchy. At least in our department, there's your DPT, which is a clinical doctorate. And then you have your terminal doctorate, which would be a PhD, EDD. And in higher ed, on North Campus, they're seen differently.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the hierarchy being on top is the PhD, EDD. And so as the only Latina on faculty, I'm one with just the DPT.
Mm.
And so for me, it's what message is that sending my students?
Interesting.
And so I'm doing it for my students. Not only my students, I do outreach for our program. And, I'm really careful in terms of DEI. Like committee, automatically you want to join the DEI committee.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really selective about that. One, I found sometimes some committees are very action-based, which is what I gravitate to. Some are just spinning in circles, right? In any case, and the reason why I'm really careful is because I'm more than the Latina, right? Yeah. I'm not the DEI person, which, I have been called that, not by choice. Someone identified me that way, that's another story. But in any case, I'm more than a Latina, right? So but in any case, I chose and lean into doing outreach. So when I do presentations, fully active, engaging with elementary school students and middle school students and high school students and undergrads, they see a Latina in front of them, right? So it's for those little kids, that I do it, because I did not have that. I cannot tell you growing up that I ever knew of a Latina who was in higher ed or, so that's my why.
I love that.
When I started this journey, so I always used to doodle. So during my undergrad 20 years ago, and during my master's, I would doodle PhD or Dr. Selena. So it was something that I always dreamed of.
That's cool.
But it's not something that was ever achievable. And it always had to have these certain markers of how I would do it. You talk about your family and doing it for them. And I think of my grandfather's, one, he was an immigrant to these states. And I remember him crying when 9/11 happened for his love of the country, because it impacted him so much. Even though it wasn't his home country, he could feel the shift. And like I mentioned, my other grandfather, who was just putting it all out on the field to help his family survive. And I think of them, and I think of my dad, and I think like I'm standing on the shoulder of giants.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
to honor them, I have to send the next generation forward. Like there is no trust. The trust that my family has given me has been poured into my brain. And so I joke with my sister, we have to protect our moneymaker. Wear your helmet. Like, no, like, and because that is what our family has been able to that generational wealth has been building into like what they've been able to help us learn. Um, and then, and my husband has always known that like this has been a dream of mine. And then all of a sudden, all the pieces clicked into place. And I told him I would be doing a disservice if I didn't do it. And he's like, yeah, it's something about it. Like he's my number one cheerleader.
I love that.
It's always something you've dreamed of. And so we talked about, because we have two young children. Our girls are 6 and 8. Like, and so
it's a hard time.
Yeah,
Sacrifice.
there's a lot going on. And so how the family life would shift, and how we would make space for this. And then I feel like I'm a teenager again because I have to ask my parents if I can go out, or if I have to stay at their house to do my homework before I can go do anything. And so last Sunday, I needed to remove myself from the day-to-day activity and go do my homework. And then my dad was like, when you're ready, I would love to read your work. Mm-hmm. And so this pride that I see that he carries with him is really special. And then when I originally started, I was like, so I could show my girls that there is no ceiling, that they can do and that they can do anything. But after the first week, I was like, you know what? Like, I say this is for all these people, but it's also for me. Like, it feels so good.
It does.
To be here and to be with people who blow me away, and to know that like we were picked to do this. So, and that's an honor, I think, in it.
So beautifully stated.
Yeah. Agree. Right on. Well, I know we're about at the hour. Is there any other thoughts or anything else that you all want to share?
I think just one thing I want to share is all the readings we've had have really allowed for like reflection, allowed for to put things in context, to think back, right? To analyze, critical reflection, and it's really a gift. So I think it's, the empathetic storytelling, the learning as a way of leading have really kind of given a new perspective. I think like one example for me was I described that high school, right, in the inner city in the Vallejo. And now I have a way to, describe it. It was hopeless, and or before I knew something was off, it's just there was no hope, which is really sad space, right? You're in there with students, high school students, which should be the future,
right?
But I mean, just things like that, now really inform me in the kind of spaces I want to create. Right, the kind of spaces I want to be in, but coexist in. So I really appreciate all the readings and the space to reflect and to learn about and with, all of our cohorts.
Yeah.
For me, the one piece that kind of came up was when we read about the democratic leadership piece, and they even talked about this as like the hardest form of leadership. It reminded me of like how I learned to facilitate. And to facilitate groups and to be able to give people voice. And I think in this conversation alone, I've realized that everybody has a voice, and it's so important to create avenues. And even if it's silly, like, drawing on a table while you're facilitating, and I call it silly, but it's just thinking outside the box and how you ask for people to share their voice. And how that can create that democratic leadership learning moment, and so that's one thing that really bubbled up for me for this conversation is how including everyone is so important for our leadership.
Yeah, I agree. I think kind of reflecting on something that you said about hope, I think for me is very hard to practice, and it's just due to the work that I do. I see so many students at the worst of their worst. Unfortunately, I don't get to see them as they're learning and blossoming and becoming, and learning who they are in this world, right? I think at times I get to see that, but it's very far and few between. So learning from you all, right, how to instill that hope in myself and in my work. I'm hope to, right?
No pun intended.
No pun intended. I hope to be able to bring that to our students so that they can see that there is hope for themselves as well. And, praying that, if you make a difference just to one person, that can change the world. So.
Well, I think it's important to recognize, I think back to high school, it was never stated, but you could feel it.
Right.
Right. And so, if I can feel it back then as a high schooler, well, if I don't show up with hope, in the class, they're going to feel it. And don't get me wrong, we have students who struggle with health issues or, housing insecurity and things like that. But again, it's about leaning in. If someone's struggling, are you doing okay? How's everything going? Come into my office.
Right.
And at the same time, being that person that they feel safe to go to.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. But right on. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your stories. They're very moving and powerful. And I look forward to learning from each of you as we go through this process. And in 3 or 4 years, I think it's 4, I can't remember, we'll all be calling each other doctor. Right on. Thank you.